What are the individual player performances that surprise the most through the first 5 games of the Dolphins 2024 season? I have my grades for each player. We're going to take a look at that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. You can find all of our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase to win $50 instantly when you play $5. One of the things that I am doing over on Touchdown Miami on Substack is each week I am grading each individual player performance for the season on a snap-by-snap basis. Who's on the field? What is the expectation based on the call of the play? What the defense or offense is doing on the other side of the football? What is your performance and your impact on the play? Pretty much trying to explore who is performing above or below standard expectations on any given football play. And the objective being to identify the best players on the field and the problem areas for the Miami Dolphins. And I've done this now for each of the first 5 weeks of the season. We tried it out in the preseason. Everybody really seemed to like the content. So that's available over on Substack in addition to some all 22 videos each week that break down both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. But I want to spend today looking at the year-to-date grades. And more specifically, relative to the performance of each individual player on the team, who are the surprising players for better or for worse? Who are players that are overachieving what expectations we had for them in the preseason and in the offseason? Who are the players that maybe you're looking for a little bit more impact from if the Dolphins are going to turn this season into anything that resembles what a lot of people thought it could look like, including myself, for the Miami Dolphins? So I want to start by looking at players that are performing above where my expectation was for them. And you start with, on a snap-by-snap basis, the most above expectation performer on the entire team. That's running back Jaylen Wright. Rookie running back Jaylen Wright. Limited opportunities. He's played less than 90 snaps this season. But on a play-by-play basis, the number of explosive plays that he's been able to manufacture, the number of plus runs he has generated, including in plays in which maybe you're losing at the point of attack, the added yardage after contact, all of that combines for a player who you'd like to see more opportunities start to go to, especially in contrast to Devon Achane, who had a very strong start, but his per play above expectation performance has tailed off so much so that Jaylen Wright's score in my scoring is more than double that on a per snap basis of being above expectation than Devon Achane. So Jaylen Wright, with the opportunities he has, is being twice as productive, and he's played 100 less snaps thus far this season than Devon Achane has, with the same supporting cast around him. And Devon Achane's best game came with quarterback Tua Tagovailoa in week 1 against Jacksonville. So the scoring on a snap-by-snap basis, if you meet expectation, it's a 0. And just a quick gloss over. We do go over all this over on Substack. But if you're at expectation, it's a 0. You can score as high as a +2 and as low as a -2 on any given play, depending on how egregious or spectacular your play is. Routine above expectation would be like half a point. So it's the foundation of how Pro Football Focus does their grading, but without all the extra bells and whistles. So to see a rookie running back sitting as the most consistently above expectation performer on a snap-by-snap basis for the entirety of the team, it's a little bit of a surprise. It's also a little bit of a surprise. I knew this was going to be a good signing. I was really excited about this signing. I didn't think it was going to be tied for the second best snap by snap over expectation performer on the team. That's Calais Campbell. There have been lots of things that have not worked for the Dolphins this offseason from a personnel and a plan perspective. Transitioning from Christian Wilkins to Calais Campbell as your other defensive tackle is not on that list. He's been spectacular. He's been really, really good. Now, he's on a snap count relative to Zach Sealer. He's played a significantly smaller workload. Zach's up over 215 snaps this season graded, and Calais is sitting around 150, 160. So the workload element, that was an attractive piece of Christian Wilkins. And I think you can look at a lot of the options that the Dolphins have to kind of be those rotational other pieces. And you're going to face a big drop off because of how good Calais Campbell has been. And then B, you have sufficient depth players, but not difference makers, or not even consistently meeting expectation types of players with the rest of your rotation. That's Benito Jones. That's who I thought played his best game this past week. That's Deshaun Hand. That's Brandon Peely. Each one of those guys is kind of lingering marginally below expectation, which I don't think I would have expected anything differently, so I wouldn't place them as underachievers. But Calais Campbell is certainly overachieving the expectations that I had for him. I would point to Marcus Maye as being the most consistent, and he's played about 110 snaps this season. And this was another signing that I liked. I did not expect him to be the most consistently above expectation performer on a snap by snap basis. And we've spent, and you saw more of it. That this was accelerated by Jordan Poyer missing this past week. But I was hoping to see a little bit more big nickel with the opportunity to have three safeties on the field to get Marcus Maye out there, because it's been pretty hard to deny he's been your most consistent performer from a coverage spacing perspective and a missed tackles perspective. He's not necessarily making a ton of the splash plays, but you compare him to Javon Holland, he's scoring slightly better than Javon Holland, and both of those two players are comfortably scoring, for me, better than Jordan Poyer. I think Poyer's biggest limitation is just the range that he has at this chapter of his career and the grass that you have to cover, especially when you're going to move guys around and charge guys with hitting far-reaching landmarks because you're disguising things pre-snap. I think those are the kinds of things that the athleticism of the other two guys does kind of show up a little bit more. But Marcus Maye seems like is a really nice hit for Miami. And I gave Emmanuel Ogbah his flowers yesterday on the show, but that is another player. He's performing above expectation on a snap-by-snap basis with over 200 snaps taken. That is not a small sample size. The next highest edge defender for the season is a Chop at 124. Jaylen at 135. And Jaylen, to put into context how big of a loss Jalen Phillips is, he's still scoring as a top 8 performer on a snap-by-snap basis for the Dolphins this season, and he's gone for the year on 135 snaps. And that was working his way back. And, of course, the injury that he suffered was a contact injury, so there was nothing tied to him working his way back. But you felt as this year would have worn on, he would have been better and better. And Emmanuel Ogbah is not a player without his faults. I thought the big touchdown run that Ramondre Stevenson had, he got hooked on a pull from Michael Onwenu that I thought was a very easily avoidable rep. But he's made some nice plays. He made nice plays against the run against Tennessee. He's had some nice pass rush productivity, even though I don't think he, as an isolated win one-on-one type of pass rush threat, is going to move the needle for you a lot. But over 200 snaps, and he has performed marginally above expectation for what you would expect based on assignment and play call and opportunity. And for a guy who signed this late in the process and frankly was not good for the team last year, It's a nice development, and you tip your cap to Emmanuel Ogbah what he was able to do this year. So those are some of the overachievers versus offseason expectations. You have a rookie running back in Jaylen Wright, who's been really dynamic and I think has really earned more opportunities with this football team. Two free agent veteran signings in Calais Campbell and Marcus Maye. And then Emmanuel Ogbah as a player who was back and with a scheme change, I think has had some life breathed into him as a talent on this defensive front. What about the guys on the other side of the spectrum? Guys that maybe you're wanting more from? We're going to look at that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So make sure that you stick with us. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and to get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnNFL at checkout. ZBiotics is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund you your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. If you're trying to go to Indianapolis, I've heard from a number of Dolphins fans that are going and want to go to Lucas Oil and go to the game next week. Why don't you get your tickets through Gametime? Gametime has all of your local venue, sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater, and more, and they take the guesswork out of buying tickets. So you can get the panoramic view from your seats before you commit and purchase. You can toggle in all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees when you put the tickets into your cart. And in just a few taps, you can get your tickets delivered directly to your phone. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's Gametime. So you guys are a tough crowd. You got yelled at for doing look at 2025 in the bye week. It's the bye week. Well, you want me to talk about the Colts this week? I couldn't believe it. I just had a notification that came up. Somebody was mad. It's the off season. I get it's the off season. It says it is October, but it's also the bye week. So let's keep it on schedule here with this 2024 team with 12 games left to play this season and a lot of different ways that this season could go. If it's going to turn around and get back towards the expectations that a lot of people had, some of these guys are probably going to have to turn it around as individual performers for the team. I'll make an acknowledgement that the quarterback play makes it very difficult for wide receivers like Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle to score as premier players because the opportunities are dependent and being above expectation. You can get open, but can you be delivered the football, and what do you do with the ball in your hands? And if it's supposed to be a timing-oriented offense, and I know we've asked for them to simplify things, but Tyreek Hill ranking thus far after getting a contract adjustment as the 13th highest above expectation player on the roster. And again, he's at mercy for the quarterback play. So I'm sympathetic to why Tyreek Hill has not had a bigger impact for the Miami Dolphins thus far this season. But he's here to be the marquee player on your offense. And he's here to make the most of his opportunities. And there's been missed opportunities on shots down the field. There's been times where he hasn't been seen in the progression, or he hasn't been in the progression. He's been an alert. There's been times where he's been targeted and the ball's been kind of placed just out of a window for him. There's been times where he has not made tough catches. All of that adds up, and it's especially true with the backup quarterback situation. Your opportunities are going to be more limited. So what do you do with them? And it has not added, it's added up to an above expectation performance because he's an elite player. But it has not added up to what you would expect from the number one wide receiver or the number two at worst wide receiver in the NFL and an elite player. And that's frustrating. That's very frustrating. So as I look at players that are above, below expectations, one of the biggest things that stand out is just how far off the pace Tyreek Hill is from the top. There's a couple of guys that on a snap-by-snap expectation basis are scoring twice as high as Tyreek Hill. Some of that has to do with Tyreek and what he does with his opportunities, like catching the ball and not going backwards to try to make extra things happen. It's kind of like the running game, right? Yards are hard to come by right now. Let's just call it what it is. Yards are hard to come by on offense. So if you catch the ball 7 yards downfield, don't run 3 yards backwards to try to make a 7-yard gain into a 20-yard gain. Just take the 7 yards and fall forward for 2 and get us 9. And that's, I think, the number one consistent theme that you see with the receivers right now is it feels like a lot of times when they get the ball, it's like, man, I got to make something happen. I think your scoring would come out more consistently favorable if you took what was available and a few hard yards. So I think that's one player that definitely stands out to me. We mentioned Jordan Poyer. I think David Long's another player who's kind of had an up and down start. One of the things I did this over on Substack this week is I looked at all the explosive runs the Dolphins have conceded this year of 15 yards or more. I think there were 7 or 8 of them through 5 games, and looked for some common themes. And for some of these, the guys that are playing in front of him, not giving him great protection as a linebacker to be able to play off of blocks and leverage gaps. On others of them, there's opportunities where you're processing the running back getting the ball coming out of the mesh point, and there's opportunities for you to choose gaps and the overlap and the trust in your teammates and knowing I got a safety who's going to fit this gap and I got a linebacker on the other side. I don't want to overcommit to one gap and then leave us vulnerable somewhere else. And on more than one of these explosive runs the Dolphins have given up this season, it's been David Long in a position where he's got to choose a gap or he's got to be patient. And it just hasn't been fully right. And David, I think in his time in Miami, has been a better run defender than he has been in pass coverage. And, he got put in a tough spot where he had the hamstring that happened against Seattle. He's caught out there for 7 plays because they're going no huddle and he's trying to get to zone drops. And then he missed the game against, Tennessee? He missed the Tennessee game and then came back and split the snaps about 50-50 with Anthony Walker. That's a player who, especially in a contract year, you're hoping to see maybe a little bit more splash. He's been about expectation for me through about 170 snaps thus far this season. He's been about expectation, but this was a player in the offseason that we could generally consider to be a quality starter. And about expectation kind of puts you more in an adequate starter type of bucket. And I think that's where, if you've been following this program for an extended period and you know how we've bucketed players, and we've put guys in cornerstones, quality starters, adequate starters, quality depth, all replacement level players, all the way down the list, there's a few too many guys that you thought were going to be cornerstones that are playing like quality starters. There's a few too many quality starters that are playing like adequate starters. And the trickle-down effect, I think it kind of seeps through the entire roster right now with what it's looked like in the first month of the season. And that's part of the reason why it feels so underwhelming at times. There's a few spots, they're not going to be surprises to you, but the scoring is bad. We're going to look at them next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Football fans, you can start the season with a bang over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You get a big return. You get a hunch on the game. You could check the live play-by-play, the stats, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So stay in the action this weekend over at FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. The offensive line enthusiasts will be pleased to know that through a 5-game sample size, you now have 2 players that are performing under expectation. Now, any given week, one of them, it's been about averaging, will score okay, and the other one will score really bad. But both interior offensive guards, both Liam Eichenberg and Robert Jones, I mean, they're both over 300 snaps taken. And amongst full-time starters or players that have played at least 75 snaps this season, 1, 2, 3, they're 5th and 6th lowest on the team. They are both performing under expectation. Now, Liam started strong for the first 3 weeks, was good, and then slightly above expectation, then about expectation, and then he was really rough against Tennessee, and he was even worse against New England. That's been a downward trend for Liam Eichenberg. Robert Jones was okay the first week against Jacksonville. He kind of nosedived and then had a really nice bounce back week against New England. But the on-season average for these 2 players has been below expectation. And I know, the offensive line commentary, it gets to be exhausting because there's people that are really passionate about it. They know that it's something where this team has decided to leave some meat on the bone, and I get it. And I'm not going to get into the semantics of debating the offensive line ideology that Mike McDaniel and the football operations have decided they're going to embrace. It's what they've decided to be, and it's on them to find the answers and have the answers for how they have chosen to invest or not invest in the team. It's on them. And, on any given week, you've got 4 out of 5 guys that feels like they're grading at least at a level that keeps their head above water. But the full body of work through 5 games, the guard spot's been a negative contributor to the performance of the offense. And the sample size, as it's grown, that's become more apparent in the separation from them and the other 3 guys, which the Dolphins invested in Teron Armstead. They invested a new contract in Austin Jackson and got his career turned around. They invested a 2nd-round pick in Patrick Paul. They signed Aaron Brewer to a nice free agent contract to come in here and be the center. And he's been a good player. He scored pretty darn well in an individual isolated expectation versus result snap-by-snap basis. But these 2 guards, as you've now grown to a 5-game sample size and the trend has been allowed to continue, the separation is very apparent. I think the nickel spot on defense is probably the biggest spot that you look at from a grading perspective. Although I will say this, against New England, you saw a lot more Jalen Ramsey in the slot. I hope it stays that way because I'll be darned if Kader Kohu's not playing better as an outside corner this year than he is in the nickel. Just feels like after being in the Josh Boyer defense as a rookie, where everything felt like it was a lot of man coverage heavy and it allowed things to be simple for him, with these past 2 defensive systems, it feels less simple. So putting him outside where things get simple again, it's not a coincidence. I don't think that the 2 games in which Kader Kohu has played his highest percentage of snaps outside this season are the 2 highest above expectation games that he has had. He was the highest player above expectation on defense for the Dolphins against New England with my grading. The highest. And he played 3/4 of his snaps as an outside corner because Jalen Ramsey ended up kicking inside playing the nickel. Ramsey's another player who, by the way, I mean, he scores well. He's in the top 12. The problem is, as a corner, especially as an outside corner, that's where he spent most of the first 4 weeks. It's really easy to negate a player, and then every snap unless you're targeted or you're going to get involved in run support, is just you're at expectation because you have a coverage assignment. They don't throw the ball your way. It has no impact on the play. So I look at his score and I say, yeah, maybe in a perfect world, Jalen Ramsey has more impact plays, but to an even more degree than wide receivers, you're totally at the mercy of the action coming your way as a corner. And Ramsey has not experienced a ton of interest in getting his direction. And a lot of the big explosive plays that the Dolphins gave up in the passing game in the first couple of weeks, it wasn't his responsibility in coverage, but he still managed to find a way to kind of work into being able to contest the play, but it wasn't his assignment. So he's not getting dinged for those plays being plays that hit for the opposing team. So for maximizing Jalen Ramsey, would love to see him continue to play in the nickel, especially as Javon Holland is going to miss a little bit of time for the team. The backup quarterback spot, this does not need to be harder than it is. I will say Skylar Thompson grades about 50% worse on a snap-by-snap basis than Tyler Huntley does. I think Tyler Huntley's a better option. But these are amongst players that have played at least 50 snaps for the Dolphins this season. Tyler Huntley and Skylar Thompson are the two lowest grading players by above or below expectation. It's tough. It's a tough look. And Tyler Huntley's now at the point where he's taking more snaps at quarterback than anybody else this season. Obviously, some of this is backup quarterbacks playing in a system. Some of this is Mike McDaniel calling plays that I don't know that the guys are best equipped to run. And even if that makes them winning play calls, if the guy who's running it can't do it, then is it really a winning play call? So if you're looking for reasons for optimism, and I'm not going to steer you in one direction or another, because there's plenty of reasons to be pessimistic with the flaws that we see with this football team that have been persistent for 3 years under Mike McDaniel. I would love to see a continuation of getting play calls in faster. Would love to see a greater continuation of being committed to the running game with more consistency. You saw some of that against New England. How much of that is just you played New England, and how much of that is, hey, we're learning some lessons finally in year 3 that we can apply for a first-time coach? I don't know, and that's why you got to let the process play out. But if you wanted to find some room for optimism, Tua in his 7 quarters of play this season did great as an above expectation player relative to the play calls that had been made and what was available to him from a coverage perspective. He gets a lot of sympathy there because the 2 of the interceptions that he had against Buffalo were plays that had blame also laid at the feet of receivers. So it minimized how much of a negative score he incurred on those plays. And even the third one, the pick 6, is a -2 for Tua. It was as bad of a score as you can give. But there was also blame to be had for how the offensive line handled the twist and Jeff Wilson getting out of the backfield to chip release and be the check down, but not really get out. So there was a lot wrong with that play individually. You contrast that to the 2 worst players for players that have taken 50-plus snaps are the other quarterbacks on the team. It feels like there's some room there to significantly jolt and provide a spark if and when Tua Tagovailoa does indeed return. And the momentum there seems to be leaning towards maybe it happens against Arizona after one more game against the Colts. But that's where I stand as far as problem areas, underachievers and overachievers, names that really stand out to me when I look at my grades for the season. As a year-to-date basis, you can catch all this over on Substack over at Touchdown Miami. The grades for each game are available there as well. There's some all 22 breakdown that happens there as well. But wanted to bring, in the midst of the bye week and this chance that we have to kind of zoom out and look at everything from a big picture scale, guys that are doing right, guys that have more to give, and spots that are definitively areas that are issues for this roster. If I had to give another area that's a problem spot, I would point to that interior defensive line depth, just because you do have Peely, Deshaun Hand, and Benito Jones. I mean, those guys have combined for about 220 snaps, and all 3 of them are performing marginally below expectations. When Zach Sealer and Calais Campbell are two of the top 4 performers on the entirety of the roster, and your rotation's taking 200 snaps, and that's what they're giving you, that drop off, you feel it. And you do feel it for the Dolphins as well. That's going to do it for us here on the show. Hope you guys enjoyed this look at the Dolphins team and performances above and below expectations. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Go Fins. Talk to y'all again soon.